Hey folks, welcome back to the Contrarians. We have another episode for you, and back in the driver's seat again today is our friend Tim Durling, who also has his own YouTube channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions. So if you're ever in the market or looking around for another YouTube show to follow his show. Also follow us at the Contrarians. Today we're going to be talking about the band Night Ranger. So this is going to be a cool discussion. Tim has a pretty contrarian pick for what he thinks is the best Night Ranger album. I'm going to be here in the other seat debating him today on telling you what is the general consensus of the best Night Ranger album. I almost let out the name of the album that I was going to say. But so Tim's here. Tim, if you want to plug anything or tell us about your book, go ahead. And if you want to tell us a little bit about your pick as well, let us know what you picked as the best Night Ranger album.
Thanks, Marco. So as far as Unspooled goes, we have now received our merch for those that pledged for the packages, the bookmarks, the magnets, the totes, and the posters, and they came out looking amazing. We're very, very close to putting our order in for getting the books printed. And at that point, once they come to us, we'll be shipping them out. So I don't have an ETA on that, but it's very much in process. We're still working away at it. And we have taken last minute orders, but the gate closed on that. We had to close the gate on that. I keep using that expression, but so who knows? There may come a time when we run off some more soft covers, but for now, we're just going to take care of the orders that we've got. And again, exceeded expectations, and it went really, really well. So Night Ranger. So yeah, a lot of people might think, how can you talk this long about Night Ranger? They had one hit. That's the general consensus, right? They've been one of my favorite melodic rock bands, started in the 80s for a long, long time. And they kind of occupy this strange midpoint, because I wouldn't call them hard rock. They're not hard rock like a Def Leppard or Whitesnake or a band like that. But they're also not just rock in the way that Journey or Foreigner or REO Speedwagon would be. They're somewhere in between. I think they lean closer to hard rock because of the guitar playing. The guitar playing is always pretty amazing in this band. And they weren't what you'd call a super group, but most of the members of the group had some pedigree before they formed as Night Ranger. Actually, they were originally called Ranger. But so first Night Ranger album came out in 1982, but up until then, I'll tell you a little bit about the personnel. Jack Blades, bass player and co-lead vocalist, and guitarist Brad Gillis were in a band called Rubicon. And just a little aside, Rubicon had a top 20 single, I think 76, 77, 78, called I'm Gonna Take Care of Everything. I'd never heard it, but I was in a used record store and I saw the debut Rubicon album. And if you look it up, it kind of has a cool cover. So it's like, I don't know if it's like a Minotaur or something like that. I think it might be because of the name Rubicon. I thought, okay, well, this was like 50 cents. So I was like, well, this got Jack Blades and Brad Gillis. This might be good. I took it home. It most definitely was not good. Or let me just say, I didn't know enough about it. Okay, so Rubicon was actually formed by a guy named Jerry Martini, who came from Sly and the Family Stone. And it sounds an awful lot more like Sly and the Family Stone than it sounds like Night Ranger. So it didn't stay in my collection very long. So Cautionary Tale. And this is before you could go on YouTube and just look at stuff. So there's two of the members. Guitarist Jeff Watson, I'm not sure what he did before Night Ranger. Ditto drummer and co-lead vocalist Kelly Keagy. And then keyboard player Alan Fitzgerald was a former member of Montrose and then subsequently Sammy Hagar's solo band. So they all had varying pedigrees. They'd all been around. Of course, famously, Brad Gillis had to choose between getting started with Night Ranger and staying in Ozzy's band because he was, considered to replace Randy Rhoads. I don't know if he came before or after Bernie Torme. I can't remember the order of that. I do know that he played on the Speak of the Devil live album, which is all Sabbath tunes. And of course, Brad, he's a shredder, right? He's an 80s guitar hero. He's not quite as well known, I think, as he should be, but he's a fantastic guitar player. And Jeff Watson's good too. That's one of the things Night Ranger were known for, is their twin leads and their, trading off guitar solos. So originally they were called Ranger. Then they found out that there was a country band called the Rangers or something like that, which I'd never heard tell of. So at the last minute, they changed their name. They'd already written a song called Night Ranger. This is the debut album, which Marco kind of has in the background there. This is Dawn Patrol, came out in 1982. So there are something like 10,000 copies of that album floating around that just say Ranger here. I've never ever seen one. I imagine they're highly collectible. Picture of the band on the back cover. This album came out on Boardwalk Records, and Boardwalk Records was formed by a guy named Neil Bogart. Kiss fans will probably recognize that name. He was with Casablanca Records. He died in 1982, so just as this label was getting underway, there were a few acts signed to Boardwalk. The band 707, some people might know of. Really, the only groups that were on Boardwalk that went on to do anything were Night Ranger and Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, but that's after they switched to other labels. So kind of a confusing label story at the beginning of their career. This spawned one top 40 single, one of my favorites by them, a song called Don't Tell Me You Love Me. Sing Me Away was also a single off of this. 1983 is the album that will probably be in contention for, best Night Ranger album, if not Dawn Patrol. 1983, Midnight Madness. I'm not going to show this too long. I want to show something very, very odd for people out there who are into things like record label variants. And Jamie, this is for you. I have to have a cassette. Thanks for the shout out in the cult episode. That was awesome. This was something that I came across in the early 90s and I was very confused by. So after Boardwalk went under, Night Ranger signed with MCA, and MCA reissued Dawn Patrol, okay? And that's the label they were on all the rest of the 80s. But in early 1992, I found this. This is a Canadian copy of Midnight Madness on Epic CBS. And
interesting.
I have no idea why, because it's every other copy I've ever seen is on MCA. If anybody out there knows what the deal is, I've got the record I have is actually on Epic as well. It's just kind of like, huh? What am I looking at here? This was this was a platinum album. It contained the song that Night Ranger will forever be known for, Sister Christian, which is a top 5 single, power ballad, maybe one of the first real power ballads of the 80s. It also contained You Could Still Rock in America, which wasn't a top 40 single, but it was one of their best known sort of anthem songs and a concert staple. It also contained another top 20 single with this song, When You Close Your Eyes, which they got really inventive on the picture sleeve and just used the album cover again. But anyway, 1985, third Night Ranger album came out, and it's called Seven Wishes. I happen to own an 8-track copy of this. This is a Columbia House 8-track of Seven Wishes. This was another platinum album for them, contained top 10 single, Sentimental Street, also 2 other top 20 singles with 4 in the Morning and Goodbye. This is the sleeve to Sentimental, the single to Sentimental Street. 1987, this album came out, Big Life. This only went gold. This was supposed to have like a huge smash single because they recorded the title song from the Michael J. Fox film, The Secret of My Success, which it's a very, very typical soundtrack song. I like it. Wasn't a big hit. Underperformed. The movie underperformed. You know, as far as Michael J. Fox movies go. Back to the Future, it was not. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even Teen Wolf. I don't think it was that successful a film. So they kind of put all their eggs in that basket. Subsequently, this album only went gold, and then they followed it up quite quickly in 1988 with their final MCA album, Man in Motion. This sunk without a trace. And if people go back to our Kansas episode, I talk about their album In the Spirit of Things, which also came out in the fall of '88 on MCA Records. And people will say that there were albums by Little River Band, Glenn Frey, Dennis DeYoung. MCA just completely like dropped promotion for a bunch of their albums and were concentrating on newer acts. I suppose like Tiffany at the time, maybe Bobby Brown. You know, the older rock bands were just getting put to the side almost as soon as these albums were coming out. So, and that was pretty much it as far as, you know, their major label albums, kind of. 1989, this came out, Night Ranger's Greatest Hits. Pretty tidy collection of good melodic rock songs, a great car CD. They've never put out a compilation that's bettered this. The only other thing I think that's come out is one of those Universal Millennium collections, the ones that they all look the same. They have the gray and silver cover on them, very bland looking. but this is a good collection. This eventually went gold. So they had 2 platinum albums, 2 gold albums. And when I say that, I'm talking about the US. They were kind of strictly an American band, although they did well in Japan too. But I don't know if they ever toured Canada. I really don't. I think they're one of those bands that are sort of like 38 Special, whereas their success was pretty much limited to the States unless they were touring somewhere opening for someone else. So the band breaks up in 1989, and most famously, bassist, co-lead vocalist Jack Blades strikes gold again with Damn Yankees. So Damn Yankees is Jack Blades, Tommy Shaw from Styx, Ted Nugent, Michael Cardellone. They put out a hugely successful self-titled debut album in 1990. Has a song High Enough on it, which goes all the way to number 3. More successful than any Night Ranger song, more successful than any Ted Nugent song. Only Styx had the beat with Babe, which was a number 1 song. So they were a really, really big band, and kind of out of nowhere, because they were one of these, they were a super group. And then they followed it up with the album Don't Tread in 92, which still went gold and had a top 20 single with Where You Going Now. So in the height of grunge, they still did okay. And then that kind of went by the wayside. Jack and Tommy developed this really good harmony singing together. They put out a couple albums on their own as Shaw Blades. But in 1990, MCA puts this album out, Live in Japan, which was recorded in Japan in 1988. Pretty good, solid collection. And then that was kind of it until 1995. So while the Damn Yankees thing is happening, Kelly Keegan and Brad Gillis put together a version of Night Ranger, and they put out this album on an independent label called Feeding Off the Mojo. Not a lot of people even know about this album. And they get a bass player and vocalist named Gary Moon, who doesn't sound anything at all like Jack Blades. He kind of sounds more like Tom Kiefer from Cinderella. There's really great songs on this, but the ones that Gary sing don't sound like Night Ranger at all. The ones that Kelly sing do. This kind of came and went. It was on a small label called Drive. I've never heard of it before or since. Then Japan comes calling once again. The original 5-piece Night Ranger reunites. Does a tour in Japan, does really, really well. John Kolodner, famous A&R guy, signs them to Sony. And they put this album out in 1997 called Neverland. This is a Canadian version of that. And the first song on here, another ballad, Forever All Over Again, got some radio play, but it kind of sank. It didn't really catch on, although there was some good stuff on here. Now they're back to now they're on to independence again. Same lineup. They put this album out in 98 called 7. So if you do the math, they don't even count Feeding Off the Mojo as one of the Night Ranger albums, because this is just, it's the 7th album with this lineup. This is the last time, I think this is the last time that Alan Fitzgerald would do an album with them. He left. He's not on Man in Motion. He did come back, but this was the last one he was on. He ended up becoming Eddie Van Halen's keyboard tech. I have Van Halen's Balance tour book, and he's listed as one of the crew members. I'm like, hey, that's Alan from Night Ranger. It's not just one of the crew guys. Then it's another 10 years or 9 years, depending on where you get it, before they came out with another album, Hole in the Sun. This is the last album that Jeff Watson appeared on. I don't know what happened with Jeff. There was a disagreement of some sort, but he was out and he's never been back. This album also, depending on where you get it, has another cover. It's got a cover of the band with just the silhouettes of the band, and they're all in shadow. This is a very labored sounding album. Then they signed with Frontiers Records, which is kind of the destination for a lot of bands of this era. And they start a pretty good run of pretty good albums. 2011, Somewhere in America. They did an acoustic album, 24 strings and a drummer. It's just live stuff. 2014, High Road. 2017, Don't Let Up. And just earlier this year, and I did a Tim's Final Confessions review episode on it, their latest album, ATBPO, which stands for And the Band Played On. So that's the Night Ranger history. Now, to get into their actual albums, and the one that I'm going to pick for my contrarian choice, I'm picking 1988's Man in Motion, their least successful of their MCA period. Came out at a bad time. It just wasn't time for some of these bands anymore when they got to the end of the 80s. And I'm going to hold up this cover here. If this artwork kind of looks a little classy and maybe familiar sounding, this is a Hugh Syme album cover. So I don't need to tell many of you who Hugh Syme is. This is probably I use this term loosely, the heaviest Night Ranger album, which doesn't mean it's heavy at all. Just means there's not as much keyboards on it, but there's plenty of guitar. You know, Brad Gillis, Jeff Watson providing plenty of cool riffs, lots of awesome solos. I don't think that Jack Blades and Kelly Keagy sounded better together on this album. Their vocals are spot on. Their harmonies were always great. This album was produced by the late Keith Olsen. This is a cassette copy, which has a little bit, I'll take it out of the case, a little bit different spin on the album art for some reason. I'm not sure why. And also another kind of an oddity I want to show you here. I think a lot of people know what cassette singles are, but this is an early cassette single that just came in a regular cassette case for the one charting song off the album called I Did It For Love. That's just a picture of the band from the inside of the album. And B-sides the song Woman in Love. Just both songs appear on both the sides. I've never seen a cassette single like this. Was early days before they came up with the cardboard things. So why do I think this album is my favorite? One thing is that there were no big singles off of this album. So to me, every single song, I'm hearing it. It's not like there's one or two songs that I've heard way, 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 way more times than the rest of them. This is just a solid, well-written, well-constructed, melodic, I'll say hard rock album that just came out at the wrong time, didn't have the promotion. MCA wasn't a big label as far as, they were a major label, but they didn't really put a lot into promoting a lot of these groups. As a matter of fact, if you look at a lot of albums by a lot of MCA artists, all you see are band photos on them. And I saw an interview once with Ron Keel, who said that usually all MCA did was say, we're just going to take a photo of the band and put it on there. He was talking about working with Gene Simmons, and Gene said, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to spend X amount of money on this cover, or we're going to take you to another label. And a lot of Night Rangers albums, as you've already seen, just have band photos on them. So they must have spent a little bit of money to get Hugh Syme to design an album for it. There is a little, it's hard to see on this, there's a little figure walking in here. And so I also should say, Man in Motion has absolutely nothing to do with the John Parr St. Elmo's Fire song. It's a totally different thing. They just, so there's 11 songs on here. The last song, Woman in Love, I don't know if it actually appeared on the record. Just let me look into that, because that might have been one of those early, no, okay. I thought it might have been one of those deals where they were trying to promote the CDs. Like
it's on the Spotify version for sure.
What's that?
It's on the Spotify version for sure.
I thought it might have been one of those ones where it's just on the cassette CD, but it's not.
Like
this album was produced by, it's produced by Keith Olsen. It's got a great sound. Most of their previous albums, the first three albums, were produced by a guy named Pat Glasser, who's passed away. And I don't know his name from anywhere else aside from the fact that he produced the second album by another MCA band, Euphoria. Good sounding albums, but it's a weird when you have a producer that you don't see the name very many places, of course. Kevin Elson produced Big Life. It's got a good sound, but this has an even bigger sound on it. And I've read interviews with Keith Olsen where he said he really enjoyed working with these guys. They were total pros. They came in, did the work, and that was it. So you'll notice that they're pictured as a four-piece on here. Alan Fitzgerald had left, although he did co-write one of the songs on here, Don't Start Thinking I'm Alone Tonight. There are keyboards on here. They're played by Joyce Imbesi and a guy named Jesse Bradman, which if Jesse Bradman, you may recognize, some of you may recognize his name. He actually joined a Canadian band in the early 90s called Saints and Sinners that was formed by the singer from the band Sword. They weren't nearly as heavy as Sword. They were sort of more commercial sounding. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. I think it was Rick Hughes. And I think they were from Montreal, but I'm not sure. Sword, that is. So anyway, he was kind of a behind the scenes guy, but they were promoting themselves as a four-piece on this. MCA did not do much with this album. They insisted that the band record the song I Did It For Love. This is not a group that recorded had outside songwriters. They, at least back then, they sort of wrote all in-house. But I Did It For Love, which is the cassette single I showed you earlier, perfectly good power ballad, but was written by Russ Ballard. Now, Russ Ballard's a name a lot of you will recognize. Kiss fans know that name because he was a member of Argent, and he wrote God Gave Rock and Roll to You, which Kiss recorded as God Gave Rock and Roll to You too, because they changed some of the verse lyrics. He also wrote New York Groove, which Ace Frehley had a hit with, and he also wrote the song Into the Night, which is on the first Frehley's Common album. Rainbow fans know that name because he wrote Since You've Been Gone and I Surrender. If you're a fan of Bruce Dickinson's pre-Iron Maiden band Samson, he wrote a song called Riding with the Angels that they did on one of their albums. If you're into, early 80s pop rock music, if you know the song I Know There's Something Going On that Frida from ABBA did with Phil Collins, he wrote that song. So he's a good songwriter, but the guys at Night Ranger already proved that they could write perfectly good radio-friendly songs. So Don't Tell Me You Love Me was a top 40 single, as was, of course, Sister Christian, When You Close Your Eyes, Sentimental Street, 4 in the Morning, and Goodbye. They already proved they could write hit singles, but they had one album that didn't have a top 40 single on it, so I think a certain amount of panic set in, and it's no better or worse than any of the rest of the things on this album. But the problem with Night Ranger, and this is a common problem that these bands have, is once you have a hit with a ballad, the record label just wants another one and another one and another one and another one. And they never even think about trying to promote one of your more rocking tunes to radio. What I like about this album is I think the guys kind of knew that this is probably it. Maybe it's the end of the MCA contract. Let's just write some good rock songs. And they're all very catchy, but they're all very rocking. There's plenty of guitars in here, and just song for song, there's just no filler on here. There might not be any one song that ascends to that, oh, that's awesome. Like there's no radio staples on this album. It's an undiscovered album in many, many ways. It's never been reissued to my knowledge. I had a hard time finding it on CD, as a matter of fact. And I just think it's an album that bears some revisiting. I think a lot of, if you're into these types of melodic bands that I've already talked about, I think you should give this album another chance, maybe, or a chance. Because if people only know Night Ranger from Sister Christian, which I happen to think is an amazing song, Kelly Keagy sings that one. That's not Jack Blades. A lot of people know it in more modern touch for Boogie Nights, but I mean, it was a top 5 single in its own right back in '84. And when I mentioned the whole Canada thing, it was the only song of theirs that was a big hit in Canada. And Midnight Madness was the only album that went gold in Canada. It was their only certified album. And I'd still like to know why it was on CBS. I don't understand that. But you can listen to this album. There's no songs that you've heard a million times on the radio, but there are songs that would make you think, why haven't I heard this a million times on the radio? The songs are that good. Now, I'm going to guess that Dawn Patrol or Midnight Madness are the sane choices, the safe choices, the sensible choices for Best Night Ranger album. Maybe Seven Wishes as well. Although I would like to say that their last few albums have been really quite good as well. I've actually listened to all of them within the last week. And that new one, ATBPO, I mean, it's sad that some of these bands put these new albums out and they just go nowhere. And they all deserve a little bit of listening too. But Marco, tell me why I'm totally off the mark with my choice for Night Ranger album.
Yeah, you're pretty wrong. You already mentioned the few albums that are generally in contention. But I mean, out of all the research I've done, there really is only one album that stands out, which actually is Dawn Patrol, even though Midnight Madness had the big hit on it. But both of those are pretty neck and neck. And I think a lot of folks kind of prefer both of those records, even Seven Wishes, like you had mentioned. Just my basic review of the album, because I did listen to it. I thought that the production was super slick. And there was a lot of good, like you had already mentioned, like the vocal harmonies and the gang style vocals were really cool on this. I found that the rock tunes were pretty upbeat. I found that the album was pretty fun to listen to. I think it is a little dated in some ways. I think the keys kind of date. Back in that like late 80s, there's some synthy kind of stuff on stuff like even the White Snake albums and stuff like this that kind of date certain things. And I think there's a little bit like of that on this album, but there isn't a whole ton of keys on this album that really make it very glaring, but there is a little bit here and there that made me think, yeah, oh yeah, this is hair metal. This is like, you know what I mean? So I did think of that time period. So it's slightly dated, I guess. In terms of the guitar work, I actually kind of disagree because, you know, there is guitar stuff on here that's really cool. Even on like the first ballad, there's a really cool guitar riff on that after the chorus. That even though it's a ballad, like there's some really cool rocking stuff on that song. But I think, if you go back and listen to like Dawn Patrol, the first album, there's great guitar work all over the place on that, and soloing all over the place, like Can't Find Me a Thrill and Eddie's Coming Out. Like those two songs, like there's tons of shredding and guitar work. And I didn't find that as much on this album, although I did find that most of the songs were pretty upbeat, up tempo, rocking kind of tunes. There were quite a few ballads on this one. I think there's like 3 ballads on this, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I found a couple of them were a little harder to listen to than maybe the other one. The things I didn't like about the album, like I had mentioned, the guitar work doesn't seem as inspired as some of the earlier stuff. And I also kind of found that the songs, there isn't a whole ton of variation in terms of song structure between the rock tunes, at least up tempo ones. They seem to kind of follow a similar type of pattern, or that there's only slight variations between the songs, which I found other than the first song, the opening track, Man in Motion. I found that the other rock tracks, after a while, the album kind of became fatiguing by the end of it to listen to, because I didn't find that there was as much variation in the song structure. Although, I mean, like the songwriting is very pop rock and there is good songwriting on the album. But I find, just in my opinion, when you go back and listen to like Dawn Patrol, like there is variation between the tracks. I find that make the tracks stand out a little bit more to each other on that album. And I think there is a lot of heavy stuff on that album too. Like you called this one a hard rock album, but it really is like rock pop. But when you go back and listen to like Dawn Patrol, there are moments where you're like, whoa, this is almost like heavy metal. This is almost like new wave of heavy metal-ish, especially from the year that first album came out. It almost kind of borders on that. And there is ballads on that one too. Like there is pop rock and there are light moments on that as well. But I find that it gets really heavy on Dawn Patrol. In terms of like statistics, Dawn Patrol, you'll see, is number 1 on a lot of lists. I'll just go over a couple of them. Best ever albums, which is aggregate. They take a bunch of statistics from all over the internet. They have Dawn Patrol at number 1, Midnight Madness 2, Seven Wishes 3. You don't see Man in Motion until number 6. So there's some later period albums that come before Man in Motion, at least on best ever albums. Sea of Tranquility did top 10 songs. And out of those top 10 songs of Night Ranger, 3 songs were from Dawn Patrol, 4 songs were from Midnight Madness, 2 were from Seven Wishes, and only 1 was from Man in Motion, which was the song Man in Motion. And in that video, Pete says Dawn Patrol, Midnight Madness, and Seven Wishes are probably the top 3 Night Ranger albums. Too Loud, Too Old Music, they ranked Dawn Patrol at number 1. They had Man in Motion at number 2. So they're more in line with you. And they just said, just quickly, for me, the most underrated Night Ranger album is Man in Motion. The album was mostly ignored by the radio and basically everyone. Mentioned Alan Fitzgerald had left the band at that point, and talked about the band's dynamics were changing and things might not have been going so well, as Jack Blades would leave the band the following year. So he did talk about kind of the turmoil in the band, but he goes on to basically list all the highlights, which he lists almost every song. I don't know where to begin. Man in Motion, Reason to Be, Halfway to the Sun, Here She Comes Again, Restless Kind, Don't Start Thinking I'm Alone, just to name a few. So he liked almost the whole album and only put Dawn Patrol out of it. And basically with Dawn Patrol, he said the same thing. Like, what's so special about Dawn Patrol? Well, everything. And listed pretty much all the songs as being the top tracks off the album. Return to Rock had Man in Motion at number 7. So that one, you'll see it drop back down again, as it did with Best Ever albums. They put Man in Motion at number 7. But they said, which is interesting, their quote is that it's their best forgotten album. And it's a combination of killer hard rock, pop metal, and accessible radio-friendly singles. And that this is my favorite album by Night Ranger. And I still think Don't Start Thinking I'm Alone Tonight should have been a top hit single. So even though it came in at number 7, like that's pretty high praise for a low ranking album or a lower ranking album. Louder Sound did an essentials album list, and the only 2 albums they picked as essential were Dawn Patrol and Midnight Madness, but they did call Man in Motion superior. So you do find that in these rankings, Man in Motion is ranked pretty well. It's pretty well liked by even the folks that rank it lower than, the top albums, which are Seven Wishes, Midnight Madness, and Dawn Patrol. It's interesting that you brought up that greatest hits package from 1989 because on the CD package at least, because they had 2 bonus tracks on the CD package, they had 4 songs from Midnight Madness, 4 songs from Dawn Patrol, 3 from Seven Wishes, and only 1 track apiece from Big Life and Man on Mission. And that came out before all those later album periods when they had kind of went away and then came back. So that came out before that stuff. You had already mentioned this is the least selling album of the first 5. I mean, Dawn Patrol wasn't certified, but it charted higher. So it's the least charting out of the first 5 albums, and it broke that streak of being certified. So you had Midnight Madness Platinum, Seven Wishes Platinum, Big Life was only gold, and then this one was not certified.
Yeah.
When you look at live statistics, this album ranks very, very low. So this album, including categories like covers and things like this, which isn't an album, but it's a category amongst itself. This album comes in at number 12 of songs they played live, was very not represented live at all. And I know that was the last album they put out before they went away for a while, and then they came back, and a lot of those later albums rank higher than it. Hole in the Sun, Neverland, High Road, Don't Let Up, Somewhere in California, Big Life, Seven Wishes, Dawn Patrol, Midnight Madness were all played much more live than Man in Motion. Like there's very little, like Man in Motion, supposedly the songs from Man in Motion were only played 23 times live.
Wow.
Which, yeah, makes me think they only played it on that tour, basically.
Yeah, probably, because on this live album, which is from that tour, they only do Don't Start Thinking, Man in Motion, and Halfway to the Sun. Now, this only has 12 songs on it, so this wouldn't have been a full show.
Right.
But, yeah, absolutely. For an album that was in the delete bins and, didn't sell very well, there is I think you're finding that there is a subset of Night Ranger fans that, and even people that rank the other albums high, you can't really find anything wrong to say about Man in Motion. And I know what you're saying as far as the, perhaps lack of variation in the songs. And, maybe some of that does have to do with the fact that they didn't have a full-time keyboard player, because that's sort of one of the things that they were known for, is having this ability to have like sort of the heavier rock tones to their album, and also have, the piano ballads or the synth driven songs. And you're right. I mean, the headbangers like Dawn Patrol. The song Night Ranger, in the middle of that busts into a jigga, 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 like it gets fast. I remember the first time I heard that, because that was the last of the first Night Ranger albums that I found. And I remember thinking, wow, that's heavy for them. And yeah, blazing guitar work all over it. The other thing about it, yeah, you mentioned about some of how the synth tones sound dated. I think that the 2 biggest culprits in dating an album for the 80s, not other than overall production, is your drum sound and your choice of keyboard sounds. There are some synth tones that are sort of timeless, and it just always sounds cool. But I know that every once in a while they'd have that keyboard patch that would sound like probably set to a horn sound. So you have, whoop, 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 and that stuff never dates well. Or when you have, and the band that I love, Honeymoon Suite, does this. You'll have one where they have it set so it sounds like a xylophone, and they're like, no, guys, don't. Just give us
like I like Hammond organ a lot. Like, and you find a lot of that on Deep Purple, Old White Snake. Like, I like that. Those kind of keyboard sounds. Oh yeah, those are awesome.
Yeah. And as far as singles on, singles on here, how they panicked and put out "I Did It for Love," which I think it hit the top 100, but it didn't hit the top 40. To me, "Don't Start Thinking I'm Alone Tonight" should have been the single. I mean, that had the potential to become a hit single. And the one song that they chose from this for their greatest hits album was "Restless Kind." So they didn't even choose the single that was pushed on their greatest hits album that actually charted. Now, maybe, granted, there may be another reason for that. Maybe that's because they didn't write it and they would have had to pay royalties to Russ Ballard. I don't know. But there are other songs. There's at least 3 other songs on Man in Motion that could have at least cracked the top 40 with a little bit of promotion and attention. And it's funny you mentioned Dawn Patrol not being certified. That's one of those albums, and Martin did a fantastic episode of his podcast, History of 5 Songs on Albums That You're Surprised Weren't Certified. And he had asked me about some suggestions for that. And I mentioned Dawn Patrol. because Don't Tell Me You Love Me was a top 40 single. The album was a top 40 album. And the two albums that followed were platinum. I have to think that the fact that it was on a defunct label might have something to do with the fact that MCA didn't bother having it audited. And it might be one of those cases where I have heard tell of this happening, that let's say Dawn Patrol sold, I don't know, 250,000 copies in its Boardwalk permutation. Then maybe it sold another 300,000 copies on the MCA version, but because they aren't the same serial number, maybe the RIA counts them as two different albums. I've heard of that happening. Doesn't make any sense. It's the same album, but I think that if in real numbers, I'd be surprised if that album hadn't been certified at least gold. So they, I think they did way better than a lot of people think. A lot of people think they were that one-hit wonder, one album wonder, but they were not. But by the time they get to Man in Motion, yeah, it wasn't their time anymore, or it was time to take a hiatus and then come back later. And they're kind of touring road dogs. Just last week, I watched, because Doc McGee now manages them, they've done quite a few of the Kiss cruises. And I watched a concert that they did, I think in July of this year, on the Kiss cruise. And I thought the band sounded great. And no, they didn't do any songs from here, and sometimes they will, and I'm sure this is one of those funny things that comes up when you look at Setlist FM. It'll call it covers when they're not really covers. When they'll do a couple Damn Yankee songs, because they'll usually do High Enough. Sometimes they do Coming of Age. Sometimes they do Come Again. Are they covers? Well, yeah, I suppose they're covers, but Jack Blades was on them. They're his songs in some kind of way, so they're not really covers. And I know every once in a while they'll honor the fact that that Brad played for Ozzy. They'll do Crazy Train at the end of the set just for fun sometimes too. But yeah, just a good melodic rock band. And I don't think, one thing is that, again, that Greatest Hits album in 1989, there's never been like a 2-disc. Universal's never put out a good 2-disc retrospective. They've never had a box set. And because they are scattered on all these different labels, I don't think there ever really will be, unless Frontiers does one where it's got live versions of all their old songs. But they're definitely deserving of that. And but this album is one that you can pluck out of, obscurity and listen to it and say, that's pretty good from start to finish. And I am not sick of any of these songs prior to listening to it.
It has an overall very epic feel to the album. It's almost like something you could pick any of these songs and they could be a montage to like a Rocky scene, it has that epic feel to it. And I do agree with you. Don't Start Thinking I'm Alone Tonight is like oddly foot tappingly good. You know what I mean?
It starts out, you think it might be a ballad, but it has a tempo to it.
Yeah. It's like Reason to Be I found a bit sappy, but I Don't Start Thinking I'm Alone Tonight I liked. Love Shot Me Down is a cool one too, and that one is like melody and vocal wise reminds me of Aerosmith. But
that's one of my favorites.
It's a good tune. I like that song. Yeah. Just to go over a couple of more things, I'm looking at the Patreon poll live, so I put this up on Patreon to ask what the folks on our Patreon channel thought of what was the best Night Ranger album. Overwhelmingly is Dawn Patrol. It got the most votes out of anything. In fact, nothing else got a vote. Midnight Madness got 1 vote, and Man in Motion got 1 vote. And I have a theory about that vote, but I'll let that slide for now. But
you are correct. Yeah, I saw that this morning. I'm like, well, I got to do it.
But it's pretty. I mean, Dawn Patrol has 9 votes right now. Midnight Madness is 1, Man in Motion.
Dawn Patrol's a great album. It's fantastic. I can't disagree with any of those first 3 for sure. But to me, like the fact that those ones have the hits and the certifications, I really want to stand up for the one that doesn't.
Absolutely. All Music gave Man in Motion 2 stars. Dawn Patrol, Midnight Madness, 7 Wishes all got 4 stars from All Music. Here's not a critic review, sorry. This is a user review. So this is a fan review of Man in Motion. This fan gave this album 2 stars, and this is what they said. Night Ranger's Man in Motion might be viewed as a compromise by the band. And I'm taking certain quotes. I'm not reading the whole thing start to finish. The second half of the record lags a bit, We get a very sappy ballad, Restless Kind, which I totally agree with. I think I just said that actually, which tries so hard to reach the unreachable in Sister Christian, but lacks the punch that song has from Keege's drums and guitar power of Brad Gillis and Jeff Watson. Restless Kind tries too hard and falls flat. After Halfway to the Sun, the song drifts into filler. I think he means the albums of the songs drift into filler territory with Here She Comes Again, Right on You, and I Did It for Love. I'd throw Kiss Me Where It Hurts in there too. But the song is fun and catchy and picks up some of the slack along with Woman in Love, which closes out the record. Overall, the record is a solid effort, though not near what Dawn Patrol, Midnight Madness, or Seven Wishes were. It's worth a listen, if only to hear how the band fought hard to make music on their terms, but ended up with a compromise where no one won. So that was a user review.
It's interesting because to me, this album sounds more like they did the exact kind of music that they wanted to do. More guitar driven with not as much keyboards in the mix. Although for them to do an album that was just simply all guitars, it wouldn't sound like Night Ranger aside from the vocals. And another thing that, one of their trademarks, I love the fact that they have these two completely distinct vocalists that sound, I say they sound totally different from each other, except when Jack Blades is singing a verse in a lower key. Then sometimes it's hard to differentiate, but I think their harmonies are fantastic. I don't know who else in the band sings. I don't know if Brad sings at all, but at least on album, they really captured those vocals, and they're almost like they're just perfectly captured in the mix. And that's been the fact of it really hasn't mattered who's produced them. And they've worked with some pretty big producers. I mean, the Neverland album was produced by Ron Nevison, and I think they've pretty much been self-produced these last few years because they've proven that they can do it. But Keith Olsen does a fine job with this. I mean, he was just coming off of, I believe, the Whitesnake 1987 album. This might have been in between Whitesnake and Slip of the Tongue for him. Maybe the Kingdom Come album, I'm not sure. But this was just, it's just a classy sounding production. And the drums have a snap to them that their earlier albums kind of didn't. But you can't argue with the earlier albums either. I don't know. I'm probably all alone on this hill, but I've always had a soft spot for Man in Motion and wondered why it wasn't more successful.
Oh, cool. I think that pretty much wraps it up then. Good pick. Good albums. Night Ranger, go check them out. Dawn Patrol, Man in Motion. Sister Christian was a huge song. Oh, one last thing. On Spotify, if you look at the top tracks, I mean, there's no tracks from Man in Motion on here. It's all from Dawn Patrol, Don't Tell Me You Love Me, which has been played on Spotify over 11 million times. Sister Christian has been played over 68 million times. So Midnight Madness is represented there too. And then Goodbye rounds up the top 5 tracks from Spotify. So it's, I think, a pretty contrarian album to pick. But I think you put up a good argument, and there's things in this album that I see are positives as well. So yeah, let's agree to disagree on this one. We got our Contrarian merch. We have t-shirts. I'm repping a t-shirt right now. If you want to run over to TeePublic, we have the link in the description. Also follow Tim's channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Tim has his book Unspooled coming out, so we're looking forward to that. We also have our Patreon channel where we do cool like panel discussions and things like that. Like and subscribe to our channel as well, The Contrarians. And other than that, I guess we'll see you next time.
That's it, dude.